feast of call stories coming at us this week and next. The first lesson, of course, is the call of Samuel, who is arguably Israel's greatest prophet. Next week in the Old Testament lesson, we get to hear the call of Jonah, one of my favorite stories. We all know how Jonah responded to his call, right? No, thank you. Andrew, Peter, Philip, and Nathaniel, disciples of Jesus. We get to hear about how they are all called by Jesus into discipleship. So it makes sense that we spend some time reflecting on stories of being called. Our own call, people who we know who have responded to a call of some kind or other. Doing the work of discernment of God's voice in our lives, in our communities, in our families, in our world. This involves oftentimes overcoming limitations. Samuel was just a boy. Famous call story of Moses, the burning bush. He was not prepared to respond to God's directives to free the Israelites. He could hardly speak in his own words. So we often face overcoming limitations in a response to a call from God. And we always have to take a risk. We always have to act in faith. Nothing is certain when it comes to a call. We're called into the unknown, and we don't know what lies ahead for us. We trust in the goodness of God. We believe that God did not call us to calamity or to abject failure, although failure is often a piece of the puzzle. So let's reflect a little bit on the way that we experience God's call in our lives. I can speak personally from my own experience. People are often really interested in, well, how did you feel called to become a priest? Well, that's a mistake that we make in the church. We think that clergy are the only ones who are called, right? We're all called, but we raise up clergy discernment often to the detriment of lay discernment, much to my chagrin. But I can speak about how I experienced my own sense of call. And it came not from a voice from heaven, not anything momentous or earth-shattering. I was 15 years old, serving in a soup kitchen in my local parish, helping to organize that ministry with the youth group that I belonged to at church. And a woman who I couldn't even tell you who she was at this point, came up to me and stuck her finger in my chest and said, you ought to be a priest. What?
And the bolt of lightning came.
I had never even dreamed about any kind of sense of call to ordained ministry in my life. I was only 15 years old. I thought I was going to be a lawyer or something. So when this woman came up to me and said, you ought to be a priest, I dismissed it. Like, oh, okay, you're crazy. Obviously, And I went on with my life. Finished high school, went off to college. I went to an Episcopal college, Sewanee, in Tennessee. And there I had really deep, meaningful spiritual experiences in the chapel, singing in the choir. And by the time I left there, I had come to terms, if you will, with the fact that yes, she was right. That is my vocation. That is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And I went to the bishop and said, actually I went to my priest first of all, in my parish, and I said, I think that I'm supposed to become a priest, but I'm gay. And I don't see how those two things can fit together. And my parish priest said, so am I. What difference should that make? So that was another, part of the call, right? Paving a way for me to see how it's possible that I might enter into this vocation. And then went to the bishop, and the bishop sent me to seminary, and one thing leads to another, and I was ordained 25 years ago, as you know. So perhaps you can see in that call story something that resonates or is similar to your own experience of responding to God's call, responding to some vocation that God has brought you into. Jesus calls his disciples in the gospel, and God is always calling us. We are rarely listening, but God is always calling. So if you are sitting there thinking, well, I'm not sure I have a vocation. I'm not sure I know how to discern what it is that God wants me to do. Take a page out of the story of Samuel and ask. Listen. What does Samuel do? He lies down and he listens. And when he hears God, he says, I'm here. I'm listening. What do you want me to do? And what we don't hear in the story, which if you read further along you'll see, God calls Samuel to a really difficult task. He has to pronounce judgment on Eli, his boss, in the temple, and his sons. So I can't promise you that it's going to be fun or easy to live out your vocation, but I can promise you that you have one, and that you have to, in order to discern that, you have to listen, you have to be open to what God is communicating to you. Also, in the first lesson, we can see that discernment is not an individual activity. It's not a personal thing. It takes a community. So Eli helped Samuel understand that it was God calling. Philip introduced Jesus to Nathanael, brought them together. Andrew brought his brother Peter to meet Jesus. It's more than discernment of vocation is more than just an individual solitary exercise. It always involves a community. It always involves relationship. And I'm quite sure that God's will for your life, just like God's will for my life, is in the heart of another person. That woman came to me and said, you ought to be a priest. I had never considered that as a possibility. She came to me and she opened up God's will for my life in a way that I was not open to myself until she did it. So relationships are key to discerning our call or our vocation or God's will for our lives. God's will for your life is probably in the heart of another person, and you just need to be in a relationship to figure out what that is. Once we have discerned a vocation, which by the way changes. We don't get one single task in life and that's it. Vocation evolves. Discernment is a constant work. But once we've discerned a vocation, a purpose for life, it becomes incumbent upon us to lead others to their vocation. If only by sharing our own story and path. Like Philip did for Nathaniel. Philip came to Nathaniel and said, hey, guess what? I found something out here. I found the one of whom Moses and the prophets speak. Come and see. Come and meet this Messiah. So we have a role in helping others to fulfill their mission, their vocation, by sharing our own story and our own path. What that says to me is that evangelism and discipleship go hand in hand. You cannot have an authentic encounter with Jesus, with the love of God, and keep it to yourself. It just doesn't work that way. You have to share it. You will have a burning desire to share it. To share your experience of Christ with others. And that will make all the difference to them in their path and their vocation. Once you gain clarity and understanding of God's will for your life, the desire to share that will compel you to reach out to those around you, in your community, in your family. Reach out to them in love and, here's a key word, humility. Right? I know what God wants for me in my life. Screw all you other people. No, that's not how it works. We reach out to others out of a deep sense of how far we've come. What a difference God's love has made in our lives. How we have been transformed and redeemed. So we don't have a sense of pride in that. We have a sense of humility. And that is attractive, right? People look at that and they say, I want what they've got. I want to experience some of that. What's wholly unattractive is the hubris and the pride and the inflated egos of people who get it all wrong, who think they're special because they figured out their vocation, who think that their discernment has raised them up above others as opposed to drawing them into closer relationship. Jesus says to Philip, come and see. Philip says to Nathaniel, come and see. How can we invite those in our spheres of influence to come and see? By discerning our call, by clarifying our sense of God's purpose for our lives, and by sharing our our story.